Hello.
Hello. Hi, Maria. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Rena. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And hello, everyone who's watching this live or who's going to be joining us, hopefully, as a recording. Welcome to YouTube. This is TBQ Live. We've been coming to you every fortnight for the last few months when Maria and I have been having a great experiment on live broadcasting via Facebook, YouTube, as well as LinkedIn. And now Maria is doing a streaming as well from into her channel. So it's all a learning experience, and which is quite nice because the topic today is all about creating neuroplastic organizations, learning new things, and being able to adapt to change, which is what we are doing as well. Today is a
Absolutely.
great topic. It's a part two of a series that we started off, two-part series, really. So last fortnight, we talked about the science element around why we need to look at creating neuroplastic organization, and I'll share a bit of a summary. And today we're going to be talking a bit more around the how, featuring neuroplasticity and metabolism, really human metabolism, and how that can really give us some powerful insights in creating organizations that can proactively change. I'm joined today by Maria Host. Of course, many of you have already been seeing her along with me. Maria, over to you for a short introduction before we go into TBQ Live.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rena. Lovely to be here hosting today. Really enjoying this new experience. So I'm Maria Chase. I am a neuro leadership coach, which means I apply the latest findings from neuroscience, how our brain works, so that we can get the very, very best out of our thinking. So that's what I do. Okay.
Thank you so much, Maria. And my name is Rena. Some of you have already been seeing me. Thank you so much for your comments offline and all the inquiries that you've been sending to us. Absolutely delighted to be here. My background's corporate HR, FTSE 500 for about 22 years before I started off my own boutique organization, which offers leadership acceleration to CEOs, C-suite and corporates, as well as scale-ups and startups. And my ultimate aim is to help leaders transform organizations by changing their own leadership styles and working with teams as well. So, in other words, I'm an executive coach and a leadership trainer. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And the great thing about TBQ Live is that actually now Maria and I are going to be releasing a new product, which she will come to in a minute. But before that, what is TBQ Live for some of you who are new? Well, it's a live show, as I was mentioning a few minutes ago. We're talking about key levers that can help leaders, teams, and organizations thrive at the time when things are really unpredictable. It's based on a book that I wrote about 4 years ago, where the strapline was Master the Science and Art of Leadership in an Unpredictable Era. And how unpredictable are the times right now? So each time we are picking up one of the 9 levers, and we're having a conversation between us as well as experts, and hopefully going forward as we mature in our live broadcast with the audiences as well. And it's all about raising awareness and having a discussion on solutions that can help all of us grow so that the community and the business grows as well. As I mentioned to you, it's every fortnight, but we're going to be now changing it and making every second and fourth Tuesday of every month so that it's easy for everyone to remember. It's 45 minutes, and that's what TBQ Live is all about. So I very briefly mentioned New Blueprint,
Uh-huh.
which is the new exciting product. So Maria, do you want to tell us a little bit about New Blueprint, and then we're going to jump straight into the topic as well?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yes, Rena and I have developed a new blueprint, which is actually for scale ups and startups to outperform. And what we do is we break it down into 3 different sections. We focus on the leadership, what's going on with them, how they can outperform. We then focus on teams, how can they outperform? And then we look at the culture of the organization, bring that all together so it's aligned. We fuse neuroscience with energy leadership, and we give people cutting edge tools because in an unpredictable world, we need to be able to flex really quickly. The new blueprint, which is a recognition of the fact that actually we can rewire, which is what we're talking about today, gives people everything that they need if they want to be able to proactively react instead of just react. So yeah, That's it in a capsule.
Love it. And we're going to be bringing more exciting tools around it in our future TBQ lives, which is, of course, going to be featuring the 9 levers, but you're going to blend it in with a lot of science because we both love science. We're a bit geeky around it. And somehow it provides us some real actual tools to make a difference, which is long lasting and sustainable, which is so, so important. Talking about long lasting change, what is it that we covered last time in part 1 of creating neuroplastic organizations? And we had an expert with us who's worked from the world of transformation, corporate startups, fintech, and we delved and had a discussion into what is the story within. What is the story within organizations about going through change? And change can be of different kinds, as we all know, right? So we talked about what's happening when startups become scale-ups and the challenges that leaders and teams face, and what's the opportunity there to start creating a culture and some habits and some behaviors and some norms that can help them proactively change. We, in fact, went even deeper to understand that when companies need remediation, what's the learning from there? And clearly what came out is those 3 levers that need to be addressed, which is culture, team, and leadership, which is the same story if you think about it in large corporations going through transformation. I worked for 22 odd years in the world of transformation across 4 sectors. And again, we know what's really important is to get these 3 right, because when you're moving from strategy to execution, what I call the glue is the culture. And who creates the culture is the leaders in the team. So really to help execute that new strategy, we're looking at creating different tools and techniques. And one of them is about creating neuroplastic organizations. We started going a bit into the science of change. It's featured the neuro leadership and energy leadership concept, the science bit I was talking about. And we answered these different questions, which are real problems that happen when an organization is going to change. Today, we're going to be covering a little about the science and the application of it, because that's something that we love as well. It's not just the science. How do you apply it so that makes a real difference to people in the field, the customers, as well as the communities that we operate in? All of those are so, so important for us. So we're going to kickstart into our real conversation for today with this amazing context, hopefully that's been useful, and talk about neuroplasticity. Maria, you.
Thank you so much. Neuroplasticity, if we want to change the slide, Rena, neuroplasticity. I'm going to read the definition to start with. The ability of the brain to form and reorganize synaptic connections, especially in response to learning or experience or following an injury. Personally, as someone who is so passionate about brain function, neuroplasticity is what I consider the most awe-inspiring and exciting capacity of the brain, because it means we can change how we think. Our brain's full of billions of neural cells. The synapses that connect and pass through all of the different connections, there are trillions of them. The thing being, actually, how our brain is wired, entirely unique. It changes with learning, as we now know. We didn't used to realize that the brain was plastic. It used to be that once you grew to maturity, we believed that the brain stayed as it was and that we actually lost brain cells and started losing connections. What's wonderful about all the new imaging technology is it shows us that that is not the case at all. If we carry on learning new things, doing new things, we can actually change the architecture of our brain. And actually, neuroplasticity happens all the time without you realizing. So one of the things to make a real important note of is your brain is plastic. It's constantly making new connections, dropping old connections. So for example, if you're trying to remember a phone number and you have to keep phoning it a lot of times, because let's face it, we're all put on hold nowadays, we actually ignite some chemicals which give us that neuroplasticity to start with, but it's temporary. So if you've been dialing a number all day, it's not guaranteed that you're going to remember it tomorrow, because that chemistry has now been used. What we're talking about today in terms of neuroplasticity and neuroplastic organizations is creating lasting change. And the way that we do that is, instead of it happening just naturally, so for example, you take a new way to get to work or a new route for your walk, that's changing your brain. if we then take this awesome capacity and make it intentional, then we can change how we think, we can change how we feel, we can change what we do. And the way that we can do that, I've developed a little equation because my brain works in that way. So if we can go to the next slide, Rena, I'm going to talk about intentional neuroplasticity.
Absolutely, I'll do. And in fact, when you were talking, something that struck to my mind, and in fact, Maria is one of the experts who's featured in the Brilliance Quotient in chapter 1, which says brain science matters. So clearly an expert on that particular field, as she mentioned. And another great way to talk about neuroplasticity is one of the stories that featured there about London cabbies. So London cabbies, it was their brain was actually scanned, and they realized that there was a part of the brain called the hippocampus. Thank you very much, Maria. There she is, a neuroscience expert, is actually had grown large. And the reason was because one of the things that London cabbies are expected to is to learn different routes to get from point A to point B. So there's an actual test. And there are multiple routes. And I remember these stories being told of me when I moved from India to UK in 2005. And because they had to learn this, that part of the brain developed and became stronger. So that's the real way that you start realizing that the brain can change. And also some great examples that I'm sure you've heard about from the world of science or from medical science is how sometimes when people lose a limb, there's another part of the brain that takes over, and other aspects of the other parts of the body take over, right? So that's again another application of how neuroscience takes place. That's where I think so people started generating some interest, right, Maria? And now a question about
absolutely.
Yeah, and also a question about, now that we know that, how can we bring it to business? And so that's where we were really coming to. I will move on to the next slide for you, Maria, as you were correctly saying, and to talk a little bit about the how.
So to leverage what happens anyway is to actually do 3 things. We need the intention. If we want to make a change, it's because there is some motivation, some passion, or a delta, something that's not working. So if we have a specific intention, it allows and tells the brain a very, very clear message. And bear in mind, the brain is a very, very obedient organ. It does exactly what we tell it to. The problem is we are 90% to 95% unconscious. So we're not aware of what we're telling it to. We're not aware that neuroplasticity is happening anyway. So it's about bringing it into the awareness. The way we do that is we bring it up to the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, the smallest, brightest room in the building. That's where we're aware of being aware. That's where we set our intention. Then we need to pay attention. And the reason we need to pay attention to this new intention is because the more we think about something, the more the bioelectrical current is pushed down this new neural pathway. That then means that that pathway becomes more used. It then gets myelinated. Myelination is whereby a sheath of fatty acids are put along the neural pathway, and it transmits the biochemical currents much more quickly. So when we first have this intention, we've made a new neural pathway. It has potentiality. The more we then focus on what we want to, the more we pay it attention, the more we're going to myelinate that pathway. It takes 66 days to make a new neural pathway for action. And the last part of this equation is action, because the brain was made to move us away from threat towards reward. So just having the intention and just paying some attention in our mind isn't quite enough to really leverage the capacity of neuroplasticity. We then need to put in an action. So for example, I'm going to use the example of exercise because that's a very simple one. Yeah, we want to get fit. Okay, I'm going to pay attention. How am I going to get fit? I'm going to have an intention. Maybe it's yoga, maybe it's something else. We're paying attention to the fact that that's what we want to do. The action is then to do it. It can be as small as 5 minutes a day. Will then actually really invigorate and enliven that neural pathway. So it's what I want to do, paying attention to the fact and remembering and focusing, keeping it up here, what I want to do, my attention is getting to that, and then doing some action. And what that actually equals is a new reality, a new behavior, and a new habit. It sounds almost counterintuitively simple, but in actual fact, this is really robust science. If we pay attention, we have an intention, and we do something about it on a regular basis, then what we're doing is we are literally changing the architecture of how our wiring is happening in our own brains. And if you think about it, everything that we do, think, feel, say, action is a neural pathway. So we now get the ability, thanks to neuroscience and all the brilliant imaging technology that's really shown us how the brain's working. And when I say light up, if we could, and both Rena and I have said it, if we could, we would put our clients through an fMRI and we go, look, when you started, this was the neural pathway. Now you've carried on with the coaching. This is how it's changed. They're not small enough yet for us to have them in our own homes. And they're quite a lot of money, according to the hospitals. So we don't have them. But it's about really having an understanding that we get to choose. We get to choose how we can rewire our brain. So we may have an automated reaction, but in actual fact, if we want to change that, we just have to put in this equation, and suddenly 66 days later, we're doing something very, very different. That's how powerful the brain can be. If we go to the next slide, Rena, I'm not going to go into depth, but I do want to speak about the potential of it. Okay. No, it's a different slide.
Ooh, where is that other slide? But you can talk about it nonetheless.
This is the one I wanted. Okay, so we're getting used to this live stuff, huh? So bear with us. We're being neuroplastic. So if we want to do this on an individual level, we need to work out, what do we want to change? What are the things that are getting in the way? What isn't working? We then need to define and refine what would be a better way of feeling, what would be a better habit, what would be better behaviors. And like I said, you then apply the equation, and already your brain, already being neuroplastic, now has a focus for where it's activating its neuroplasticity. Also, it's about, the teams being neuroplastic, because an organization may be made up of individuals, but teams are more than the sum of the parts. So it's also about identifying and aligning missions, goals, and outcomes. Because for a team to know where it wants to get to, these have to be very clear, and everyone has to be singing off the same hymn sheet. It also means building in flexibility, though, and allowing an individual to achieve in their way, because everyone's way of doing things is different, because their wiring is unique. As unique as your fingerprint is your brain wiring. So therefore, not only do you have to align, but you have to also build in flex. Nowadays, everything's been so unpredictable that building in flex, we're doing this automatically. So let's make it intentional. So not only is your team aligned, but you're also bringing in all of that creative thinking and allowing some flexibility, because how you get to an outcome doesn't matter. It's the fact that the outcome, the goal, or the mission is hit. So what someone will do will be different, but if it's aligned, then you're being neuroplastic. In terms of on an organizational level, it's about sharing this concept, because if people realize that they are able to rewire a new habit, it's very freeing. It also means that they know now that their organization is very aware of this concept and supports this concept, because the more I'm supported in my thinking, the quicker my neural pathways are activated. So not only do you need to share this concept so that it's talked about, how neuroplastic are you feeling today? Or actually today I'm not flexible at all. I just want to be how I am in my wiring. Then we need to promote personal growth and exploration. The brain learned to start with by exploring. Yeah, we explored how to be a human. So it's also very important that the individuals within your teams, within your organizations, are practicing their own neuroplasticity from their own intrinsic motivation, because external motivations are really important. I care what my organization does, but I also care about my own personal growth. I have yet to meet many people who don't care about their own personal growth. So it's also about giving some room around that. I know certain organizations allow someone a day a month, and actually they get to work on what they want. Some amazing products have come out of that. Google, for example, does that a lot. The other thing is about breakout places. Now, the reason I say this is we learned to start with by playing. And actually, Google, that's getting a lot of recognition today. We should get sponsored by them. So they have breakout rooms in all of their offices. There's places of massive soft play. There's places where you can go paint. There's places where you can go and do your Tai Chi. And that is a very playful way of allowing people to be at work, but also getting their brain to be very relaxed. The brain isn't a muscle, but when it's not stressed out, it acts like a muscle in terms of it's really curious. Our brains without stress are really curious. It wants to know new things. It wants to be playful, because that's how we learned initially how to be a human. And the last thing is to align company mission statements with individual contributions, because the individual has an intrinsic motivation. What do they want to contribute? And how does that contribute to the overall organizational mission statement? Having these conversations, even bringing them into awareness, starts the process of neuroplasticity. If you remember something and tell yourself something 3 times, you've already started a new neural pathway. So by having this very overt way of talking about these concepts already means that an organization is more neuroplastic. If we go on to the next slide, Rena, please. So a great tool that is used to get the brain into an optimum state of being is the SCARF model developed by David Rock. It makes teams very, very accessible to this intentional neuroplasticity, so that actually it's picked up much more easily. And we're actually going to focus on this way of outperforming and getting your brain into the kind of place where it's able to outperform consistently. On the 26th of October, we're going to focus our TBQ Live on that particular way of thinking about getting intentional neuroplasticity into your organization, so that actually you can do that, and getting an individual's brain to outperform consistently. But that's for another time. I'm now going to hand over to Rena. I've talked to you about the science. I've even given you an equation, which always feels very, very satisfying to someone who's so passionate about this amazing or inspiring capacity of our brain. So how are we going to apply it, Rena? What does it look like on the ground?
Thank you so much. I think you've already started planting the seeds in our conversation. And I love the fact this is a discussion. And while you were speaking, there were so many thoughts that were sparking up in my head as well about, and a couple of simple things that I want to relay before I go on to the next slide. Breakout places, the play spaces, so important. One of the things that we used to do a lot during transformation programs in companies is to have team away days. So a lot of you have team away days, right? Where you have people who play these games, and sometimes people think they're silly games, but it's actually creating a connection between teams and helping the brain relax in the company of other individuals when there is a stressful scenario of a transformation. That's a great application to create a breakout space. So you might not have Google phone, as you said. Google needs to give us a little bit of sponsorship there so people can play around, but to really give people that sense of play becomes really important, because the brain loves to play. The brain loves to solve problems, really, doesn't it?
It does.
So if you put it in a playful way and engage the brain rather than you have to change, it brings in a different kind of a reaction. And that's something that we touched upon last time, which is the reaction versus the PFC reaction, the limbic being whereby all you're doing is fight, flight, freeze, versus the PFC reaction, which really helps you come up with new creative choices. and playing helps you do that. And yes, we're going to be talking more about staff on the 26th of October, which is the fourth Tuesday. Remember, I said second and fourth Tuesday, where we'll really up the conversation that we are having within the new blueprint as well as TBQ Live, which is how do we make high performing teams outperformers. We know there are organizations that are doing really well, and we'd like to work with them so that they can really raise the game at an individual and team level and create a culture which is a high performing culture as well. But let's continue with the conversation and narrative that has been laid down by Maria for us, and to continue a bit around the science to understand what happens and why people resist change. So there are a few things on the slide, so stay with me on those bubbles. And if you think about it, these are the kind of statements that people speak of. Whether they speak openly or not, it's definitely going through their brains, or they might be having those corridor conversations or coffee conversations about it. And this is why people resist change, because they're like, this has never been done before. Why are we wanting to change? It doesn't mean that it's going to affect my job. Am I going to be paid less? We can't fund this new change or new business development that's taking place. There's a fear of failure. There's a fear of unknown that's there, right? This is what happens why people resist. And why, when all of this is happening, what happens is what I just referred to is your limbic comes into action, and all it gives you therefore is either fight it, i.e. you resist the change in subtle or not so subtle ways within the organization, or you might fight, flight, or you might just ignore it, right? Or you might just kind of move away from it and get busy doing other things which are important rather than on transformation program that's going to really change the organization. Or you freeze, you just go into denial sometimes, right? You don't do anything about it. So that's the reaction that happens in organization. And a great way to be able to really bring this up is to talk about what I've written down there, which is the gales. Have a conversation about what are the gremlins? Is it that we think that we can't achieve things? Is it that critic within us, or at a collective level, at a team level, or within some leaders within the organizations who think that perhaps they can't really make this change, or they're perfectionists and therefore they think it's impossible? Is it an assumption that something happened in the past and therefore it might happen again? A legacy baggage that somebody's bringing from a previous organization, or something that the organization did earlier on and therefore they're resisting it? Is it how they're interpreting it? Are there limiting beliefs around it? Is to really, the minute you start spotlighting some of the gales associated with the change, it helps start unlocking a reaction which is happening at a reflex level, as Maria was saying, because more than 90% is pretty much unconscious. So a lot of these are really affecting how an organization can change. So to bring that up and into open, safe spaces within the organization, to talk openly about it, because we know it exists. Sometimes organizations go into denial, and I think so that's a trick, is to really have a conversation about saying, what are the gales in the organization regarding this change? What are the gales in this that we have collectively because of the changing business landscape, because the pandemic has hit us, because workspaces no longer exist, or because Brexit has happened? There can be various things, or there's a new opportunity, digital transformation, technology is coming into the business. What are the gales associated with it? Really bring that into light becomes something which is really important. And then to be creating what we call circuit breakers. And I'm going to bring back the fact that Maria was talking about the intention, attention, and then the action per se. Because what happens is that there is a neurological pathway that's already existing, which is might be influenced by the gales, and therefore people are resisting it. So you need to create circuit breakers before you can create that new neurological pathway. And breakout spaces, for example, is a great example of a circuit breaker, because it gets people into a different space to talk about it or look at it from a different angle, right? So that's a great example of a circuit breaker. Having team breakaway sessions and conversations are circuit breakers. At an individual level, for leaders who are experiencing this, or teams who are individuals who are experiencing this, is to really think about, what can I stop myself so that the amygdala or the PFs or the limbic doesn't take over? How do I really kind of manage that aspect as well? So it's creating circuit breakers is something that's really important. And we go into some details when we do workshops with organization about what could be the circuit breaker so it stops you from having a natural reaction. And imagine if every individual is having a natural reaction of resisting change or being fearful of change, at a collective, it starts creating the wrong energy.
Mm.
And you need the right energy for the right action to take place. Because when you're having a limbic reaction, you are having a lot of adrenaline within the organization, that is, and which is a result of people getting angry, irritated, frustrated, stressed out, burnt out, which is all things that we are seeing in organizations right now. So it's quite scientific, the entire approach. But once you understand it, you realize, right, that's what's creating the anxiety or the fear or the stress within the organization. What's my circuit breaker intervention? What's my circuit breaker intervention at an individual level that can stop me going down that route? And then to be created, to create that new intention, attention, and action, you need to look at, how do I relook at this as an opportunity?
Mhm.
What is the new belief system that I have which will help me change? Because one of the things which is true is that people will change if they believe that the change is good. But
Yeah.
because they don't fully understand it is when these issues start coming up. So here are some great ways from at an organization wide level, which can be great circuit breakers as well as reframes that can help start nurturing change. Now bear with us because we're just trying to cover up a lot within 45 minutes. We do talk in much more detail and work with leaders and teams on how do you really implement it. But this is giving you a flavor of the concept of how you apply the science of it. So what are the reframes? You probably have gone through some of the ones that I've listed out there already, but let me just read it out to you. One very powerful one: permission to fail. When you're doing something new, you need to give people the opportunity to fail. If you think about it yourself at an eye level, if we are fearful of something, if we give ourselves the permission to fail, of saying, let's try it out, at best we're going to fail, it's okay to fail this new behavior or a pattern and experiment on it, it changes your energy level from that limbic to a PFC of new choices, because then there's a lot of hope behind it, there's a lot of choices around it. So giving permission to fail is a lovely reframe and a nice cultural signal to send within the organization that it's okay to experiment and fail. And a lot of companies that you're well aware of allow this, 3M being one of them, which had started off with that ethos as well. The other is about giving up control for greater good, is to give that signal within the organization. And let me give you a simple one. Sometimes when you're going through change, you need to give more power from headquarters to branches, for example, or to different countries, right? Or you let go of some of the control that was existing in the current, because control gives the brain the chance of saying, we know what's happening, right? It gives that safe space for the brain to operate in. So giving up control can be really difficult. But if you think that you're giving up control for the greater good and people understand that greater good, it becomes easier for people to let go of their current jobs, their current processes, and be more open to change per se. The other great way to have a reframe within the organization constantly is to engage customers and employees in the journey.
Mhm.
Again, something which happens in organization is that leaders, and in the best of intention, feel that they need to come up with the best story of the change and the new scenario and present it to people. But often we've seen that if the leaders can stand up and say, here's the opportunity, here are some ideas, help us create it so that we can serve you, Mr. Customer or Miss Customer, in a better way, and we can help you, employee, in a better way, so that it becomes far more richer, you will grow better, you will explore your own opportunities better. It becomes a different way of looking at change, which can often be seen as oh, we're fearful about it. Diversity, another great thing that we've been talking about a lot, but a great way to bring about nurturing change and bring it as a new way of thinking, new choices, because that's what we want rather than the fight, flight, freeze, is diversify your boardrooms and structures. Get it
Mhm.
people from different companies, different backgrounds, different cultures, to really bring in that thought process that allows the brain to look at opportunities, which it will not, because I and you and everyone who's listening is limited to our life experiences.
Yeah.
We cannot think beyond that because that's what our brain has been exposed to. But when I get exposed to somebody else, it might trigger off an idea. And because I've been given the permission to fail, I have that culture within the organization to give up control. I know that I want to engage with people. I will listen and think, oh, that's a great idea. Let's go down that particular route. Or that's a good business opportunity that I've heard from my customers. So really diversify your boardrooms and structures, another practical way to bring about nurturing that change. And the other, of course, that Murray has been talking out, and let me just underline it further, is really nurture the talent. That becomes exceptionally important by giving them the tools and techniques to manage this fear that we know that people go through, rather than, oh, they're just going to change kind of stuff. So here are some great ways to look at it. Murray, you want to make a point before I move on?
Absolutely. One of the things that came to my mind when you were talking about it is emotional contagion. You know, that sense of we all have fearful, our brains are just hardwired to be fearful of change. It's how we were, it's how we got to be here. So it's also about that we all mirror each other in terms of how we're feeling. So what you were saying about if we, you know, give people permission to fail, it means that you don't get that emotional contagion of everyone being fearful of making mistakes or fearful of the change. So that just came up for me when you were talking. I wanted to share it because the power within an organization of emotional contagion, it can work against you, but it can really work for you. You get everyone on the same page talking about the greater good. And actually the emotional contagion then means that everyone's ready, energized, and transformation isn't quite so scary.
Fantastic. Absolutely. And one of the great things, just to build up on that, is really the role of leaders within an organization, and which is our invitation to the companies that we are working with and we'd like to offer new blueprint to, is to really work with a handful of people. And if they start behaving in that way, and if they start thinking in that way, that emotional contagion starts taking place. And also another concept that we use a lot from neuroscience is mirror neurons, i.e. the loudest mood really wins. And therefore that also starts playing up quite well within the organization. So how are we really investing in our leaders to help them not just lead themselves, but lead their teams and businesses by starting by leading themselves? So great point there, Murray, and a great build up on that particular point. Here's another one, talking about leaders, I find really, really useful from the world of change as well as coaching per se, is something known as a pain gain model. Now, many of you would have heard about the pain gain model, but bear with me because there's some interesting questions that have helped really break barriers, and this is proven. When I have worked with people at an individual level and team level, and it brings about a robustness in conversation and a robustness of trying to understand why there's resistance or what are those inherent subconscious fears. And once you start spotlighting it, that awareness itself, rather than it being embedded within, that awareness of talking about it, as we often know, is again another scientific element to it, helps lessen the control that it has over our actions and the energy response that we are having, which might be catabolic, i.e. adrenal, cortisol, which might be leading to stress, anger, anxiety, and all of those things on an ongoing basis, or and what I've been talking about, so just two questions of saying, what is the gain of changing? Now, normally organizations ask this question in the pain gain model. What's the gain of changing, right? But just to also ask that question, what is the gain of not changing? That's hidden. That's when the hidden fears come out. Is what will be the status quo? And it may be our current processes. We don't have to come up with a new process. The way that we behave, change the stakeholder connection, to change our structures. We like the current narrative, we need to stay with the current narrative. So no change, as Maria was talking about and we were referring to earlier, is great for the brain, because the brain is like okay, everything don't need to change. But the point is, when you start raising some of these conversations, it airs it out and gives space a new neurological pathway, plasticities, to setting it within the organization. And also then to ask the question, what is the pain of changing? What is the real pain of it? And what is the pain of not as well? So really having those robust conversations focus is really important. The main question out of all of this, which really bring fears, which might block companies from changing, is what is the gain of not changing? I invite you to think about that question and of your teams, because it reveals some interesting insights which might be becoming barriers, because the gain of change is pretty much there. People are going to benefit, employees are going to benefit, community is going to benefit, business growth is going to happen. So we know about it, but it's good to have that conversation. So space and an internal conversation, some of this. So that we have to experiment and think about what's the pain gain model. What is it that's the pain and gain of changing or not changing for that matter? Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up because our session is always 5 minutes. And we're going to start wrapping up it, and we've got about another 5 minutes left. So in summary, there are questions that we've been talking about. So if it's been overloaded and if you want to replay it, or indeed if this is something that you're already doing, congratulations, well done. It's three, if you would wait of saying help creations that are neuroplastic. One is to really train people to be change makers. I mean, over a period of time, we do learn to change. But the fact of the matter is that the circumstances have changed. Not only change has become a constant, a phrase that became very popular ago, but also change is unpredictable right now, right? So we need to proactively train people to become change makers. And some of the concepts that we've talked about, neuroplasticity, some of the concepts that we had touching upon from the world of neuroscience, metabolism, is energy, leadership, is really giving the tools of understanding how I can proactively let all the problems and issues and challenges change and become. That's the top one strategy that you do, whether they are leaders or they're individuals within it. Very, very powerful way to look at it. And when you start doing that, what you start doing is that you start powering up your organization literally with unlimited energy and the right kind of energy. Because what you do have an organization a lot of gap, because that's energy. So sometimes you find companies that are fighting and battling it out, and you're going to get to the front line, but doing it with us, and then autocratic behavior and toxic taking place. That's energy as well. But the point that we're trying to say is that can be very short-lived, and it's not the benefit that you want. You want to create a vibrant organization. You want to have an organization that's anabolic energy. You know, that's got that passion, people are in the flow, people are opportunities. So you really power it up by having people understand how they can create a world within their head, within their mind, and within the organization to have that kind of unlimited energy and be resilient, truly, truly resilient, from a space of power rather from a space of fear and catabolic space, limbic as well. And the last but not the least, in all of these communications stories that we've been talking about, whether the pain gain model, frames and attention, is you're making the story that we are holding collectively about change and insightful and positive. So something that helps us understand more who we are and how we can work together with our teams to create a world, a far richer world, and something that's beneficial not just for our generation, but for the generation. I'm going to hand over to Maria for the final thoughts, and then we'll raise conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rena. In summary, your brain is plastic. We can change, we can rewire, we can actually make everything so different. So let's make it intentional. These are such unpredictable times that actually let's be proactive about the transformation and not just do it because we have to. Because if we do it proactively, we get the energy that you were talking about, anabolic energy, which is so creative as opposed to the short-lived bursts of the fight and the cortisol and adrenaline. It's also about allowing individuals to bring their best game to the organization, because if their brain is more plastic and you are invoking neuroplasticity, you're getting better thinking. And most of us are paid to think nowadays. And also a last point I wanted to make, when we talk about narrative, that's how we learned to communicate. It was always about storytelling. That's how we first developed language, being around a fire, working out what was going on for other people, because what's going on for other people is important to me. So narrative is so powerful. If you take control of the narrative, the rest just falls into place. I really hope that you have enjoyed our talking about neuroplasticity. I hope that you think, is my organization neuroplastic? And if not, reach out to us. We would love to work with you and find out what we can do to benefit you. I hope this conversation has been valuable. I'm going to say goodbye. Rena, you say goodbye, and then we will leave people to their lunch times on a Thursday afternoon.
Indeed, indeed, and absolutely. This is like we had been food for brain, but maybe you need food otherwise or a coffee. And who knows what time you've been watching this, whether it's a recording or whether you're from some other part of the world. We are based in UK, so of course this is London time, and we know that we're probably going to grab a bit of a bite after this. But absolutely, to mirror of what Maria was talking about, do reach out to us for more. We are going to be back for sure on October 12th. So mark your calendar, please, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about accelerating high-performing teams into outperforming teams. That's the area that we work in. We are not performance coaches who are going to be working with teams that are in trouble. We do help there as well, of course, because every high team has challenges, but our aim is to really make high-performing teams into outperforming teams. And we've got some interesting tools and techniques that we might want to share with you. And of course, we welcome you to join us every second and fourth of Tuesday of every month, 12:30 London time for 45 minutes. This is TBQ Live. This is Maria and Rena signing off. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks.
I've enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
And I hope Maria and I can have this conversation with you. And that's what I'm saying, me too. Bye for now.
Bye for now.